It's very rare that I have like nerves before a show. I got one with Mike Rogers. I actually had one with Whitney McAllister. Sorry, not Cummins. Whitney McAllister. I think because that was like the very first show. But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
and Mike, I get nerves before because like usually when I talk about fighting, usually when I talk about martial arts, I feel like I'm the smartest in the room. But it's very, very rare where I'm like, oh shit, like I'm talking to like a real master. You know what I mean? So Steve Berger, man, first and foremost, brother, thank you for coming on Easy Talk.
Thank you for having me, man, and appreciate the intro.
Oh,
That's
dude, you deserve much more than what I gave.
I
I was
appreciate it.
telling Matt, and I was telling you before, if there was like a Mount Rushmore of like St. Louis MMA, you and Mike Rogers are like one and two for sure, and I don't think anybody
Appreciate
can
it.
argue that.
Appreciate it.
I wanted to start with I had Mike on a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and the conversation we had was predominantly like his history, his upbringing, how he got invited to
Right.
intrigued with martial arts, and a lot of his story was synonymous with yours because you
Sure.
guys were neighbors when you were
Right.
younger. He would say things like, "Well, Steve Berger got me in. Steve Berger was doing this because he was doing wrestling."
Right.
So it just logical next step would be like, "Oh, well, you have to have Steve on so that he can explain the thing from his perspective." So before we even start, I wanted to ask you how you got inundated with jujitsu or MMA in general, because it was so many years ago.
I started probably, obviously I think you just got to be born with it a little bit. I mean, I don't think that wrestling, boxing, fighting is for everyone. Don't get me wrong. I think that many, if not almost all, boys want to do it, but there's a difference between doing it, that kind of hurt, and maybe I just won't do that again, and then committing to it. And for me, it was just always it was fun. I mean, I guess runners want to run, and baseball players want to play baseball, and fighters want to fight. So it just
So from an early age, you knew you had this kind of like competitive spirit slash combative like spirit. But I guess my question is a little bit more nuanced. It's because when you guys were coming up, when you were young,
hmm.
MMA isn't what it is today. Like now you
Oh
can
no.
flip on the TV and it's in front of your face, right?
Right.
You kind of had to search for this, either finding the VHS tapes for like UFC 1 or 2.
Right.
But like Mike was telling me essentially that you kind of like dragged him to a show. You kind of like you were the first one who got inundated with this and kind of spread it to Mike. So like my
Right.
question's a little bit more, how did you even stumble upon mixed martial arts UFC?
I can remember the very first time, and Mike and I both wrestled in high school. Mike was a better athlete than me. He was bigger, stronger, all that. We were wrestling in high school, and what's funny is like I liked wrestling, and I did it, but I didn't love it. I would skip out on it. Do whatever. I half-assed it. The best way to put it, and wasn't something that I loved. And all of a sudden, like I graduated and I was like, oh man, I can remember being like, man, I'm not gonna be able to wrestle next year. And so I kind of, I started looking around for stuff to do. I was like, well, I'll get into boxing. My dad had always boxed, and when I was younger, he would always work with me on boxing. So I got into boxing, and I was doing boxing, and boxing was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't the grappling. It wasn't because I would get beat in sparring practices and stuff, and then I think I'll bet if I could just
If I could
double
just
leg
grab
this
a
guy
hold of you.
down, or and so it was kind of one of those type deals, and all of a sudden I heard about this UFC, and I started looking for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and stuff.
So that's the thing. How did you hear about it? Was it like in the gym, like boxers were talking about it? Did your
No.
father bring it up to you? Because my intrigue in all this is
Hmm.
I could tell you exactly how I found out. Like I was flipping the channels and Spike TV UFC was on like the 70s,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
But Versus was like in the 40s. So between Comedy
Right.
Central and like Cartoon Network, I stumbled upon WEC and I was like, yo, what is this? That's how I got inundated. But it was more commercial at that time. But when you were younger, it was like fringe.
when I
So
when I was younger, they had you had cable, and you would go through cable, and then you had like the pay per view channels, and there was only like a handful of pay per view channels, but you would clip through there, and they would run like ads for what the pay per view things were, and there was this event, And I was born in 1973. So MMA, it was just always, oh, you could never do something like that, street fighting. You watched Clint Eastwood in Any Which Way But Loose, and always thought that, that's the type of UFC that you were thinking of. It was just a couple bikers out under a bridge or something. So I'm flipping through and all of a sudden I see this ad, and it's got this, because I had missed UFC 1. This was UFC 2 that they were running the ads for. And I'm looking and I'm watching. I was like, there's no way this is real. It's got to be fake. And I was living at home with my dad. I think I was 19 or maybe 20 or something. And I was like, and I barely had, $5 to get together. And so the pay-per-view was like $25 or whatever it was. And I was like, boy, this looks like it could be real. I doubt it is. And I was like, screw it. I'll just get my ass kicked by my dad later and work the money off, And I clicked it, and sure enough, that was it. So then right away, I just started, I started looking for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there was zero Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time.
So you watched UFC 2,
yeah,
and you
watched
saw
UFC
how
2.
BJJ was so effective, and you're like, I need to do that.
Right. And it was funny because here I am looking at this Hoist Gracie guy in a gi, and at that time, you knew wrestlers were the real deal, you knew boxers were the real deal. And so I was thinking, I remember watching Art Jimerson come out against this Gracie in a gi, and I'm like, oh, he's
smashed.
Gracie's going to kill him. I watched that ad or whatever, and sure enough, boom, Gracie wins, whoops him. I was like, holy crap, So here I am, I'm watching this actual show, and I'm like, wow, this I got to figure out a way to do this. No Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I started researching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I find that
it's keen to point out that this is also the days before Google, before you could just
right,
Google BJJ around me.
Absolutely, yeah, to go to the computer, the Apple, and type it all in and stuff. And
so we were on the yellow pages like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right. And so I'm typing in, and I find out that Jiu-Jitsu, judo came from Jiu-Jitsu. And it was basically, Jiu-Jitsu, from what the definition said. I remember it saying that Jiu-Jitsu was guys were getting injured too much. It was too brutal. So Jigoro Kano came up with judo. So I went right to a judo place, and then, I started doing judo, and I did judo for a little over a year. It was Bong Yul Shin, who was he was big time bodyguard for the Bushes and stuff like that, and he ran this judo deal.
The family or the presidents?
The family.
Okay, the Bush family.
Anheuser-Busch
okay.
Here, yeah. And he was a great guy, very, very tough, the whole bit. And so he was really into the Kodokan judo. He would have us do the actual, not just concentrate on the floors, but when we hit the ground, we would actually roll and stuff too. And I actually brought Mike up there to him when Mike was in from college, and Mike came up and rolled with us once or twice too.
How did Mike do?
He did good.
I'm
He did
sure.
good. Yeah,
college wrestler, a big
college
bear
wrestler.
of a human.
Right.
I'm sure your coach was like, "Hey, man, stop bringing these guys in."
Well, he didn't. Shin was so old by then. I don't know. Shin was probably in his 60s then, and we're going back 30 years ago. So it was a while ago. But Shin wasn't doing any grappling at the time. But he had his black belts up there, and Mike was wrestling with them and doing well with them and stuff.
None of that shocks me.
Yeah. Mike's a beast.
So you had this original foray into inception with judo first.
Right.
But when was it that you stepped foot into your a jiu-jitsu gym?
Well, I ended up while I was doing judo, I got thrown, and they teach you break falls. Put my hand down, and for whatever reason, it was just a weird deal. My body landed on my thumb. It snapped it in two. So I had to go and get surgery, get my thumb put back together, pins, all that stuff. And I was out for quite a while. And by the time it healed back up, I had been drinking on weekends and partying and stuff like that. And then, I was 22 or something, and I was like, I kind of want to go back to actual judo and get into this. So I started flipping through the phone book, and looking for my old judo instructor's number and stuff like that to call him. And that's when I see Rodrigo Vaghi, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, had come to downtown. So I right away called him, said, hey, what are your hours, blah, blah, blah. Drove up there, and, I tell everybody at that time, win, lose, or draw, I thought I'd give Mike Tyson a fight. And I walk in there, and I wrestled Rodrigo, and he just annihilated me. Yeah, it was just unreal. And then he put me to roll with this 17-year-old kid.
Can you explain that for someone? Because I oftentimes, whenever I'm watching fights with individuals, especially the unlearned ones, they always make comments of like, how are they this tired this early? Or why can't this guy just get up? Which is always the fun question.
Right.
Can you try to articulate to me how you felt the first time you rolled with Vaghi?
Helpless. I mean, it's like, you go in there, I locked hold of him, and I felt strong, especially as a young kid, and just had a ton of muscle on me at the time, and I locked hold of him and the whole bit, and the next thing I know, I mean, it was just like trying to wrestle water, he just was, before I knew it, and when I say before I knew it, I'm talking like 3-5 seconds later, I'm tapping out, right? And it's like, you have no idea what you're getting into. And
I say jiu-jitsu has the best marketing for itself, because if you go to one jiu-jitsu class, you're like, ooh, this works, right? Like if you go to a kickboxing, taekwondo, boxing, whatever it is, striking martial art, or even wrestling. I consider wrestling a martial art, personally.
Right. I do too. Absolutely.
It's the art of throwing people. But there was something always different about jiu-jitsu. I remember my first time I went to this basement of a pizzeria, and I'm a state medalist at wrestling. I was first year in college. I was like, I'm the shit. You know what I mean? Come on, There's this little Asian man, maybe $130 soaking wet, and when I tell you, he made me feel like a child, like a father playing with his kid. And after that first match, I was like, oh, this is the best way to describe it is it's truth. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like, not that other things aren't also truth, but this is so visceral, so honest, that I am helpless to this man. If he wanted to leave with my limb,
nothing you can do about it.
There's no negotiation.
Right.
I'm pleading for my life. And that's what kind of, in a very sick way, that's what got me going, I need to learn this.
And that's just it. I mean, here I was 22 or 23, I don't remember. I rolled with this 17-year-old, and I'm giving this kid a good match, and the next thing I know, he chokes me out. And I drove home crying. I was like, I am not the man who I thought I was, and I just immediately started living in that gym, and Mike was wrestling at SIUE at the time, and I was telling him, hey, as soon as you get done wrestling, you need to come up here.
What was Mike's reaction when you would call him?
He said, okay, I'll do it. And I don't think he had no idea. He probably thought it was another karate or judo place or something like that, and so I have no idea what he actually thought, because, Mike, he's just go with the flow. So, but he came up and he became a believer just like I did, and he started living in the gym too. So,
Can I ask you a question that I've always kind of never understood? Why did you guys decide, and I'm kind of skipping around here for a little bit, but we'll come back to this, I promise. But why did you guys, did it ever occur to you to open up a gym together?
Yeah, we had planned that pretty much from the go. I mean, we had planned that consistently, and here's the thing, like looking back, Mike and we had lived together, we were best friends, we worked together, we hung out on weekends together. It got to a point where we were, there was times where the guys on the roof, because we were roofing together, they were getting in between us because we were both running down the ladder and knocked the shit out of each other, and there
was it competitive between you two?
Well, I mean, Mike and I were always competitive, always. Now, he would have whooped my ass, but I, I'm from the school.
You'd give him a fight.
Yeah, I'm from the school. You got to do it, because there may be a chance I'll get something in. But you know, it was, and you know how it is too. I mean, Mike was and probably still is closest thing I had to a brother. And, you know, I think I moved into that subdivision when I was 7 or 8 years old, and Mike was one of my first friends.
Do you have any siblings
So,
now that?
no, I don't.
Oh, so
I
you were a
don't.
single
Yeah,
child. Okay,
only
so
child.
in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, Mike was like
Right.
that brother.
Right, absolutely. And we got to the point, like, we were arguing and bickering and all that stuff. We had like a roofing company together, like I was saying. You know, we were having problems with that. And
When
so,
you say having problems, you mean like if I may, let me know if I'm incorrect.
Sure.
You have two strong personalities, two strong egos, two strong people that are trying to like decide on a direction, and it's becoming more hostile than it is productive.
that was exactly it. We're both alpha males. He
And you
wanted
wanna do it
things
your
his
way.
way. I wanted my things my way. And, you know, I'm not saying I was right. I'm not saying he was right 100% of the times, but we were butting heads instead of sitting down. And, you know, we were young too. So instead of either one of us being smart enough to sit down and work things out, we would butt heads. And we just got to a point in our life where, you know, it was like, hey, we're either going to fight and kill each other, or we're going to kind of go our separate ways. And that's, you know, it was one of those deals where Finney had been offering me for almost a year to go up to his gym.
You talking about Jesse Finney?
Jesse Finney,
Okay.
yeah. He had been offering me at that point for a while to go up to his gym, and I just, you know, I was getting married. I had my fiance was pregnant. My dad was in my ear telling me, "You're a fool. You need to do this." Blah blah blah.
Because it's like guaranteed income. You're at a
Right.
gym. You don't have to deal
Right.
with the business. You can just deal with
Sure,
jiu-jitsu.
sure. So I, you know, right or wrong, I did it, and you know, I mean, of course, there's regrets. I could have handled it better. You know,
Hindsight's 2020.
right. I was still young, and of course, Rodrigo was my idol at the time. He had taught me everything I knew, and going into it, I thought, man, I'll open a no-gi place. He'll have a gi place, and we can
Coexist.
we can just exchange students and go that route. But it didn't go that route, and you know, I mean, it is what it is. Hindsight's 2020.
And I told you this before, but
Right.
I'll repeat it again. I'm genuinely curious on this story. Right. But if I ask a question that you don't want to answer, by all means, you could say, "Hey,
Sure.
carry on, not this one." Terribly sorry to interrupt the content that you're enjoying right now, but if you've been watching our content for the past couple of months, you realize that Easy Talk is a brand new podcast. We're genuinely trying to figure this thing out as we're going. Some growing pains for sure. If you are genuinely enjoying this content, we feel very humble in that, but we would like to ask that you would also subscribe and like to the channel, simply because it does help us in the algorithms and ultimately to grow. So take a second. I'd really appreciate it. And on with the show. How would you say your relationship with Rodrigo is now, today?
Good. I've seen him. You know, he and I never really had a big fight over it or anything like that. He had sent me one text message that I was in Brazil and I heard that you're leaving. We're going to talk when I get back. And so I text him back, okay, and he never called. So I just I was like, well, all right, I guess that I'm just written off. So it is what it is. And like I said, you know, if I go back, I probably would have done things differently. But you know, it is what it is.
It was always just something that was curious to me because, you know, I always thought of you and Mike as like such knowledgeable guys, and I always knew that you guys were friends and that you grew up together. I just didn't know how close or like how tight that bond was.
Right.
And it was always just like kind of like something in the back of my mind, like why is there like a Steve Berger MMA? Why is there a St. Charles MMA? Why don't they just like come together? But I'm also young. I don't understand the nuance and the history behind it. So it's kind of, I don't want to say the word fun. It is fun for me to kind of like understand this now because then it kind of adds context to when I was younger and I was first getting into MMA. Right. to kind of bring the story back a little bit, you were the first one to step into Rodrigo's gym, and then you were kind of like, hey, Mike, this is like the shit, man. Come on down whenever you're done with wrestling. Can you kind of walk me through, you're going into jiu-jitsu for the first time to thinking about fighting, like to actually compete in cage fighting?
Well, that was,
that's a big step.
Yeah, that was my thing. And like when I started too, we were all gi. There were, Pat Miletich. I was actually scheduled to fight Pat Miletich. That's how far back we're going. Pat Miletich was just kind of opening his deal and kind of redoing his all around fighting, combining, jiu-jitsu and boxing and wrestling.
I believe they called it Vale Tudo back then.
Well, and it was, it was funny because like even when Mike and I first signed up with Rodrigo, there was Brazilian jiu-jitsu players and there was Vale Tudo players in Brazil. And, they had a big, deep rivalry and stuff like that. But
between the two?
Mm-hmm, between the two in Brazil. That's
why? Because the Vale Tudo guys were like, you're not really fighting?
Well, yeah, the Vale Tudo guys were more like stand-up fighters, but they would, and the jiu-jitsu guys were more ground fighters. Now, the Vale Tudo guys started trying to learn the submissions and trying to compete with the jiu-jitsu players. And so, like, if you looked at all those fights and stuff that they had back in Brazil, you would see, like, extremely good grapplers on the BJJ side. You'd see extremely good strikers whose ground was, And that's why 90% of the time the BJJ guys who had poor stand-up would still get them down and win. Every once in a while the Vale Tudo guy would land a shot and stuff. Well, Miletich, basically when it came over here, wrestling, as you know, is probably the most dominant factor.
I say to people all the time, let me know. I'm actually curious because I'm going to say this to you. I didn't say this to Mike, but I get a lot of guys that ask me, like, Ariane, like, I'm thinking about getting MMA, like, what are the two martial arts? And for the longest time, I said jiu-jitsu and boxing because I said you need to know enough on the ground to defend yourself. Right. Even if you don't want to submit anybody. Like, let's say you were a boxer and you just want to knock people out. Fine.
Sure.
But if you do, and when you do get taken down, you need to have enough jiu-jitsu to understand how to defend yourself and get back to your feet.
Right.
Since I've started saying that, I actually went back on it. And now I honestly think that the two martial arts that you need to learn are wrestling and then jiu-jitsu. Right. I say wrestling because jiu-jitsu is such a strong martial art, but you can't, I don't think it does enough of a job to teach you how to get the fight to the ground. If you can come in there with a wrestling background, understanding single legs, double legs, anatomy, all these trips and stuff, and then learn jiu-jitsu, I don't want to say you don't need striking, but you will be so much better off understanding how to take people down and submitting them versus trying to strike with them and preventing submissions.
Well, I think I started wrestling, 8th grade. So 8th grade to senior year. Yeah. And that was it. So I was an okay high school wrestler.
But you had 4 years. I know that you say you're in and out, but like, dude, 4 years of high school wrestling. Think about how much of a leg up you were when you stepping into that gym.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's it's funny. I know we had talked beforehand about my son and stuff, but I told my son that if you're going to learn any one, wrestling's the most important. Stick with wrestling because when you're a good wrestler, it's my biggest regret. I wish I would have gone on and stuck with or sought out more wrestling because that was how I got beat later on too. Was just guys knew I was a good jiu-jitsu player, so they'd either keep it up where I couldn't take them down, or when they took me down, they'd just stay defensive.
Yeah, and prevent submissions.
Yeah, I lost just a ton of decisions, But the wrestler, not only are they just the most conditioned sport, but they can come in and start learning jiu-jitsu. They can start learning their hands. And it almost seems to me like they learn at a quicker pace than the guy who's never done it. So
I can only speak from anecdotal evidence.
Sure.
I would agree with everything you just said.
Right.
I also would say that of all the martial arts I've done, everything has its strengths and weaknesses, including wrestling.
Right.
Boxing has its strengths, its weaknesses, jiu-jitsu, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I could tell that when I started MMA, because I was 4 years of wrestling, I had a different mentality, a different work ethic, and a different like threshold for being uncomfortable than
Sure.
the other guys. And
Absolutely.
then once I learned jujitsu, like this is gonna sound kind of weird, but hear me out on this one. I think learning jujitsu and then wrestling is different from running wrestling and then jujitsu. Because in my opinion, wrestling is more visceral and more explosive, while jujitsu is more cerebral and more, I don't want to say the word slow, but more calculated.
Sure.
So if you can combine the explosiveness and the physicality of wrestling with the thought process and the slow nature of jujitsu to where you're looking for leverage, not necessarily a pin, dude, that is such a potent combination.
Right.
And I think I'm not saying that you need wrestling to be great at jujitsu or you need wrestling at all. To be honest with you, we've seen guys like
Sure.
in the UFC today that are successful.
Pereira, yeah.
Exactly. I didn't want to say it, but that's exactly who I was thinking
Yeah.
of. But you know what's funny about that is we say that, but at the same time, guess what? They're training at the gym. They're still training wrestling and jiu-jitsu and all these
Absolutely.
other things.
Well,
you can
that's
have
just
your
it.
strength.
Sure.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is if I were to tell, 10 kids come up to me, different heights, different weights, different everything, I would tell all 10 kids wrestling, jiu-jitsu, then boxing, personally.
Absolutely.
In that
And-
order.
And the big thing is like, like you take in Pereira, styles don't fight, people fight.
Yeah.
So Pereira is just a hard nosed son of a bitch. I mean, he obviously, like you
He's
said,
special.
yes, he's a little different than your average guy, and obviously, even though his wrestling probably isn't nowhere near the level of some of these guys,
Good enough.
yeah, it's good enough. And another thing I've been telling my boy is, look, wrestling's not fighting, jiu-jitsu's not fighting, boxing's not fighting, Muay Thai's not fighting. Only fighting is fighting. You look at Matt Hughes, he wasn't the best wrestler, but look, he's a 9-time world champion.
Champion.
I mean, it's one of those things where he was able to make them all work out. And I've seen great wrestlers step in that cage and just get whipped,
And
pimped.
fold.
Right. And the same with great boxers and great jiu-jitsu players. Saul Ribeiro, I think he's 0-1 as an MMA fighter, but one of the best in the world whenever he was doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up because I think I don't want it to sound like you absolutely need wrestling. I guess what the way I'm trying to phrase this as best as I can is, in my mind, if I were to form like the greatest fighter ever, right?
Oh, yeah.
I would start with wrestling. But does that mean that there are not outliers? Absolutely not.
Right.
But I would also still come back to like the exceptions do not necessarily make the rule. I would still tell all 10 fighters, start with wrestling, move to jiu-jitsu, and then learn the hands.
Absolutely.
However, I'm sure there's some guys out there that can switch that around
Right,
and still
right.
be phenomenal.
Well, and it's like we were saying, styles don't fight, people fight. If you have 10 wrestlers, there's probably going to be one of them who's got that death
Dog in 'em.
first. Yeah, I'd rather die than tap. And, all the others, this is fun, but I'm done. So.
When you hear the term like athletes and fighters, I've heard some fighters tell me like that guy's athletic, but he's not a fighter.
Right.
What do you think they're trying to what do you think the nuance is in that? Because I've heard many times that like the athlete can stay in it until he's in there with a fighter.
Sure.
And you were saying earlier that like you knew at an early age that you kind of had that X factor, that thing in you that kind of attracted to combat because you were doing it before it was sexy, before it was cool, before I mean you had to kind of seek it out. It wasn't finding people.
Right.
So what do you think when you hear things like that, like the difference between an athlete and a fighter? Do you think it resonates or do you think it's kind of just bullshit?
Here's the thing. No, I think it's 100% true. It's all the mentality. The same thing that we were just touching on with Pereira and the dog in you. The fighter, he doesn't care if you break his nose, if you hurt him, if you cut him, if blood's coming, he's going to keep going until he can't go anymore. It takes a special person. Some people aren't like that. Some people, man, oh crap, I didn't sign up for this, or this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and then they're out. The fighter, he's in it until he's out. Like I said, death first. He ain't quitting.
I fucking love that quote. Death first. We got to put that on a t-shirt. Death first. I'm going to bring it back a little bit because we kind of deviated slightly because of me, forgive me, but we were talking about the transition from first coming into the gym, jiu-jitsu gym,
Right.
and then getting to the point where you're competing. When was it that you thought about having your first, like, quote unquote, cage fight or just no holds barred fight?
The day I watched the first UFC.
No shit.
Yeah,
So
the
you
day I
already were
watched-
like, I'm in.
How do I do this?
So that was the goal. It wasn't necessarily jujitsu. Jujitsu was just a byproduct.
No, you can ask Mike Rodrigo, any of those
Oh, I
guys.
did. Mike said that you wanted to fight. Mike's like, I was never a fighter. Steve was the fighter, which was hilarious to me because I was like, really? Because when I talked to Mike, when I talked to you, like, you were always like the more calm guy. Mike was like the emotional one. I was like, oh, Mike is the kind of guy. It's hilarious that it's like the duality of life.
A lot of people say that to me, and it's funny because I'm good and normal, like when I'm
You're
talking
civilized.
to people and all that stuff. But like as soon as you say, "Hey, I'm gonna kick your ass," okay, let's go. Let's go see
0 to 100 real quick.
Well, and it just for me it was always like, if you're gonna if somebody came up and said, "Hey, I'm gonna whoop you in a game of basketball," all right, let's go. That's how I viewed fighting. I mean, all right, fair enough. I don't have to hate you. I doesn't bother me. It's a challenge to me. So let's see.
How did you view it at the time? Did you view it as a sport or did you view it as something different?
At the time I was a young guy, and I think I was caught up in all the mix of the toughness and stuff like that.
Did you like the title of fighter?
Yeah, I liked the title of fighter. I liked trying to present that image and stuff like that. But all in all, it was just like, I want to see if you can outlast me. I want to see if you can beat me.
Which one's going to break?
Which is,
That's such a savage mentality, Steve.
Right.
Such a savage mentality. Walk me through the first fight. How do you even get it signed up? Because these are the days where, like, I don't think promotions are super common. Right?
I'll tell you what's so funny is Brian Madden was his name, and we used to, when me and Mike and all my other high school friends, every weekend there was only like 3 UFCs a year back then, but every time there was a UFC fight, we would gather everybody up. And of course, everybody wanted to be Stallone and Schwarzenegger back then, so we all had gym memberships and stuff too. Brian Madden was one of the original Killer Bees from the World Wrestling Federation deal. And
I'm gonna speak my age here. I have no idea who
idea.
the Killer Bees are.
And Brian Madden was probably 10, 12 years older than me and Mike.
Okay.
So, we're going
Different.
back a way, and the Killer Bees were like famous pro wrestlers on that pro wrestling. You turn on Channel 11 and stuff like that. So, anyways, Brian Madden was in the gym, and we just got to talking, and I don't even remember the first time I met him. I'm sure it was through a workout or something like that. But anyways, he ended up coming over to my house to watch the fights with all of us. And so we were sitting there, and I'm going back to like UFC 3, UFC
Jesus.
4, stuff like that. Actually, it would have been after UFC 3 and 4 because we went to UFC 3. Or Mike went with me to UFC 4. Me and my other buddies went to UFC 3.
He was telling me about that story about how it was at like a rodeo show or something like
Yeah,
that.
it was hilarious.
Fucking crazy.
Well, the first one, UFC 3 that we went, my dad had a Cadillac at the time, and I talked him into letting me borrow it. And so me and my 3 buddies drove up to Charlotte, North Carolina in this Cadillac, and we drive to this UFC, and it's in a high school gymnasium. Was the thing.
You're
we
kidding me.
bought tickets, front row tickets through a magazine for $50 a piece.
At the time, though, that's actually kind of expensive.
Yeah, well,
For
at the
$50
time,
like 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because I guess at the time I was roofing then, so I was making pretty good money.
But still, in retrospect, what's
Right.
front row tickets now? Like $7,000, $8,000 for cage side
easily,
or front
so,
row.
Yeah. So $50. I mean, it just hilarious when you look back at it and stuff. And we sat front row. Well, then And Mike couldn't go to that one for whatever reason. I don't know what he had going on that weekend, but he couldn't
Good.
go.
More room in the car.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna tell him he took a shot at his weight.
Dude, I hope he doesn't watch this one. Right. I love you, Mike. Please don't like gorilla grip me.
But we came back. We had a bunch of great pictures and all that. Mike's like, "Oh, I'm going to the next one." So we went to the next one, and that's actually a funny story. Mike and I actually got in a fight in that one.
Together or
with each other?
No shit.
Hotel security.
He didn't tell us about this. He played it off like a cool cucumber. He's like, "Yeah, me and Steve went to the fourth." I was like, "Oh no," and he just brushed over it.
Yeah,
Do you want to talk about it?
Sure.
You guys drink? What happened after the fight?
Oh yeah, we were drinking. We were probably 21 at the time, I guess, and it was me, him, and three of my other buddies, or our other buddies, and we were drinking, and I think we went to a strip club, and in Oklahoma.
As all good stories start,
we're in Oklahoma at a strip club, and me and my one
the finest.
Me and my one buddy Craig. We were really giving my other two buddies, not even Mike, we were giving my other two buddies a hard time. And the whole time up there, I forget what was going on. One of my buddies had like a real big lower lip, so we always called him Lip, and the other one had terrible eyes, and he was driving. So and me and Craig
and no one thought that the guy with the worst vision shouldn't be driving the car. So, this is fighter's mentality.
And we're drinking, right? And he made like some bad turns and stuff. So me and Craig and my other buddy are just having a blast at their expense. And the guy with the big lip was trying to find where we were going, and he was screwing up. So in the meantime, Mike's just sitting back there being Mike, and he's giggle here and there. But me and Craig were giving these two a real hard time. Well, they were really getting pissed. And Craig and I, we're drinking and having fun. And so it's just getting more and more entertaining for us. We finally get to the strip club. Well, we had really pissed them off. And so here we are in Oklahoma. And I guess they went up to Mike and they're like, "Hey, dude, fuck those guys. We're going back to the hotel. We'll let them find their own way back because we're not taking that. So you either come with us, or if you make your way over there, you're going to be walking home. You're going to be walking with them." So Mike does a smart thing, and he goes with them. So in the meantime, me and my one buddy Craig, we're just having a blast, and we're like looking around. "Hey, you see those guys? I don't know where they went." And they wouldn't leave us. We're fine and stuff. And then all of a sudden, we're like, "Oh,
little do you know."
Yeah. So then the rage just started.
You mean the guy that I was calling Lip all night, and the guy that can't see straight would leave us at the strip club?
Lip and eyes left. What the hell? Where's
Shocker.
your sense of humor? And then I was more pissed off at Mike. I was like, because Mike and I had been.
You thought he was going to stay and make the bad choice.
Right. So I was drinking too, and it was just stupid. And so we finally, I talked some guy into giving us a ride back to the hotel. He said he knew where it was and stuff. And so we finally make it back to the hotel, and I get in there while I'm just fuming. And, so I start banging on the door. We had these two hotel rooms for the five of us. And Mike and the other two were in the one, and then me and my buddy were in this one. So there was a middle door in between there that you could open to
get into the rooms.
Yeah. So I tried the door, and they had it locked. They knew I was a hothead at the time and stuff. So I'm banging on the door, and I'm like, "You're fucking lucky that this is locked. I whoop the fuck out of all you."
Meanwhile, Mike opens the door like, "Come again."
And here's the thing. Mike opened the door, but Mike, he was just like opening the door like, "Settle me down." Mike wasn't even opening the door to fight. So, and I'm banging and yelling all my tough guy shit. And all of a sudden the door opens. Well, I had a lot in me and stuff, so I walked over. Boom, Mike was just, "Hey, sorry about that." Blah, blah, and boom, I hit him, and then the fight's on. And Mike starts. He was a way better wrestler than me, and he went in to like double leg me, and luckily it wasn't the most solid double leg. I started kind of falling back, and we end up in this closet. Like we bust through the door and end up in this closet, and then he couldn't take me down because I had the backing of the wall. So I'm trying to like hit him, and he's trying to pull my legs out from under me and stuff. And yeah, he started hitting me, I'm hitting him, and the next thing I know, we just hear boom, boom, boom on the door, and it's the hotel security. And there, because I guess I had been screaming the whole time too, fuck you guys, get over here, blah, 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 calling them. So hotel security, so we kind of separate, and here I come to the door, and I open the door. I was like, "Yeah, what's up, guys?" I got a bloody nose, and what's going on in here? Oh, nothing.
So a bunch of boys being born.
Right. So
no property damage at all.
Yeah. So that all ended up getting settled, and they were like, "Hey, knock it off. We're calling the police." Blah blah blah, and.
Mike completely overlooked this story. They never even brought it up. He just made it sound like you dragged him to UFC 4. I'm going to say something Mike like, hey, man, why are you leaving out the juicy deeds?
Right.
I didn't know this, like, progression. I didn't know how close you guys were. It's honestly kind of beautiful, especially now to know, like I was saying, when I was coming up with MMA, to get some of this context. I always thought you guys were so competitive because, like, you didn't like each other, but here it is. You guys are competitive just because you're competitive, but you actually love each other.
Oh yeah. Like I said, he's a great guy, and I got a bunch of stories like that with Mike.
A bunch of fighting stories.
I mean, no, just a bunch of us going at each other.
When was it that you decided to open up your own gym? Because you said that you left Rodrigo's to go coach jiu-jitsu at Jesse's. But when was that transition to make your own gym? And was it at first the thought to make it an MMA gym, or at first was it the thought to make it a jiu-jitsu gym?
It was always going to be MMA. I think I was, Rodrigo, I had been with Rodrigo for like 10 years, and Rodrigo is not known for giving belts. I was a purple belt, and, it was just kind of like one of those things where I would go in a purple belt under Rodrigo versus a black belt anywhere else was...
You're smoking them.
Yeah, right. And so, here I was, like I was saying...
I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sure.
But you bring that up. Is that a sour spot for you?
No. I really, to be honest with you, I don't care. I love I love that I'm not a black belt. It doesn't bother me because as soon as I step on the mats and I roll with somebody, the mats don't lie.
Would you ever consider going back to gi to get the black belt, or at this point are you like, I just don't care?
I did,
because no one's going to argue the credentials.
Sure, I had a podcast that I did not too long ago, and I was like, look, it's one of those things where I don't really want to go. I know I could have probably went to several other places, and I know I could have been a black belt by now. But I did start under Rodrigo and Hickson, and I don't want to, JW, great guy. I went up there. I asked them to give me a guy so I could, at my no-gi school, have somebody to teach the gi. Well, I went up and I rolled with them in the gi for a while, and they're like, oh, there's no way you haven't been doing gi. And I was like, no, I did gi for like 10 years under Rodrigo. I said, my gi game, I still remember it, and it's just the basic Gracie stuff is all our style was, at least back then. So
can I ask you a jiu-jitsu question?
Sure.
Why is it that the belt system only works under the gi? Like, why can you not belt someone in no gi?
And I thought about doing that for a while, and actually at my school I did start like giving guys
belts for no gi.
Yeah, for no gi. I would say, hey, you're a white belt. Hey, blue belt, whatever. And we just did colored shirts, and I just kind of kept that for a little bit. And it's one of those things, like, had I been a better businessman, I would have marketed that better and probably done better with my gym at the time, but I just, I didn't.
Let me kind of rephrase the question, I guess, because I genuinely don't understand this. Why is it that you can only be belted in the gi? Because jiu-jitsu is a martial art,
sure.
Okay? And in that bubble, you have like variations of it. Like you have gi, no gi. You're even getting now to like the combative jiu-jitsu where you can like, hit while you're grappling.
Right.
But why is it that only the gi portion? Because I've been doing jiu-jitsu now for 10 years, and I'm very similar story like to you. I'm a white belt. Right. I'm a 3-stripe white belt.
Sure.
But when I roll with people, I'll roll with brown belts, I'll roll with purple belts, I'll roll with black belts. I'm doing just fine, right?
Absolutely.
I never understood this, and it's not because like it's not sour grapes. Because truth be told, if I really wanted it, I would have gone to gi. So
Sure.
obviously, I don't want it
Right.
enough, right?
Right.
But for me, it's more like an investment of time, and I just don't care enough to do it.
Right.
But I never understood why it's only under the gi that you can belt. Is that like an unwritten rule?
I think it's tradition. You know,
and no one wants to break it.
Yeah, that's the way I would put it. Is it's going to be tradition, you know, and it probably has a lot to do with this is the way I was belted. This is the way you're going to be belted. And you know, I mean, it just I think there are guys who are starting to break onto that, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years you're going to see that, because same thing you were saying, like with you saying, I think wrestling's a martial art. You can take a wrestler who would definitely be considered a black belt, you know, and
Black belt in what respect, though?
a black belt in
Like
wrestling.
submission? Oh,
In
black belt in wrestling. Okay,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
going to say. Yeah, like an
you
NCAA
definitely-
All-American
yeah,
comes onto the
he's-
mat. He's a blue
without a
belt.
doubt. Yeah.
You know, at the very least.
Sure. And that's the funny thing. Like we were started off this conversation. If you take that NCAA champion, you put him in there, he probably is going to get tapped out for the first month by white belts. And then
I don't know about that, Steve.
After the first,
I don't know about that. Maybe blue belts and purple belts, but white belts, I don't know about
I'd
that.
say, like, when I say white belts, I mean white belts with four
Some
stripes or
some
so,
experience.
you know,
Okay.
something like that, you know.
Fair.
So we can just stick with blue belts. But what the big difference is going to be is probably in a month's time, he's going to be getting those blue belts, whereas your average guy is going to need a year or more until he finally is able to.
I can agree with
know.
you, because it's exactly what happened to me. I struggled for like the first 2 weeks, and then
Sure.
I was going from getting tapped because I didn't know
Right.
to getting not tapped really quick, like within a
Absolutely.
week or two, and then from getting not tapped to starting to tap. Once I started learning some submissions,
Right.
within a month and a half, the guys that were tapping me, within a month and a half, I was tapping them, and everyone was like, "You're a prodigy." I'm like, "No, I'm not." I was like, "No, I'm not, guys. You guys just don't know how to wrestle.
Yeah,
It's
that's
I'm not
just
special."
Well, wrestling's all about takedowns and control.
Yeah.
So once you learn to keep your head out of the Venus flytrap, you know, you're doing well in your arms.
I told them I just had to unlearn a lot of things. Like, it wasn't that wrestling wasn't. It's not that wrestling didn't help me. I just had to unlearn a lot of the rules in wrestling. In wrestling, you want someone to be on your back all the time. You don't want to have your back on the mat. Boy, did that change quick. In wrestling, you're like, you know, you're going in for double legs and you're looking for the sky. Boy, did that change quick. You
Yeah,
know,
right,
I was after a week of getting caught in guillotines. I'm like, man, I didn't really need to start taking my chin in.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's cool, and it's a neat deal too, because of the time frame that I started learning, and because of how well I did, I got to roll like just with some of the best guys and the biggest names in the sport, you know. So and back then they were no different than Steve Berger and Ariane Zekti sit here having a talk, you know. Like UFC was just kind of starting to get to be something. Some people knew, some people didn't.
How did you get into the UFC? Because you're like one of the first pioneers of fighting, quote unquote. Like, and you were on, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be incorrect on this one. Were you not the first St. Louis guy to compete in the UFC?
I think, I forget his name, and I'm not 100% sure if Jermaine Andre is Illinois or St. Louis.
That's fair, because
but-
he's also an OG. I would put him on the Mount Rushmore
'cause
as well.
He got in like one or two UFCs before me, but
but roughly same time.
there was a guy in UFC 1 that I think was a Missouri guy. I don't know if he was St. Louis, but there was a guy in UFC 1. I forget his name.
Fair.
Yeah,
Can't beat the first.
He was, yeah. I wasn't the first. He might have been the first Missouri guy. He might have been one of those little hobunk towns in Missouri. But Jermaine, I don't know whether he claimed Illinois or whether he claimed St. Louis. But if it wasn't Jermaine, it was me. So.
How did you find that fight? How did they find you? Like, walk me through that, because like, how long had you been fighting before
Okay,
then?
so this is interesting too, because Brian Madden started the SFC, the Killer Bee guy I was telling you about, and getting back to
And SFC is a fight promotion
it
locally?
was called Submission Fighting Championships. It was the very first like one in the Illinois region, because it was illegal in the time to throw mixed martial arts fights in Missouri.
Thanks, John McCain.
Yeah, right. Thanks to John McCain, absolutely. But Illinois, they would let you do it. So Brian opened up the very first one, SFC, and I had a few fights under him. And hell, he even right after Jeremy Horn fought Frank Shamrock in the UFC, he hooked me up with a fight with Jeremy Horn right there in Illinois. So in Fairview Heights, I think that one was.
That's so crazy to me.
And then there was a guy who was, his name was Randy Greenman. He played on the opposite side of the law with a lot of stuff, but he absolutely loved mixed martial arts, and he loved the UFC, and he loved Pride Fighting Championships. And he developed a really good relationship with Goker and brought Carl Parisian and Manvel Gambarian here. I was able to, I was speaking of guys that I got to wrestle with, Manvel and those guys. I mean, he brought Harut Teresian, just a bunch of those guys over here at the time, and he had a lot of extra cash that he needed to kind of burn up, and so he went ahead.
Steve said, "I'll be your Huckleberry."
Yeah. Well, he started throwing fight shows, and he had it was called Reality Submission Fighting Championships, and he had me, Sean Shirk, Carl Parisian, Shoney Carter, Joe Merritt, and then I think there was like 3 other nobodies in there, guys who didn't do much. But anyways, all in this tournament. Oh, Chris Brennan too.
Okay.
And then he had like 2 other guys in there that I don't think ever became anything. But that was all in one tournament. And I fought, this was my second time fighting Shoney. I had fought Shoney and I had beat him in overtime on a close decision the first time we fought. And then in this, Shoney and I were in the same tournament, and Randy just made it so that Shoney and I fought first because Shoney was crying foul and that it was a lucky deal and blah, blah, blah. Well, I ended up, it was kind of funny because I think I was supposed to fight Shoney's number 1 student. I forget his name. God damn. He was a really good fighter too. If it comes to me, I'll blurt it out. But anyways, was Shoney's guy, and so I was preparing for him, and then the next thing I know, I get a call the night before the fight, and Randy's like, "Hey, so-and-so is out. You're fighting Shoney." And I was pissed. I was like, "That son of a bitch, he's been planning this the whole time." In my head, you couldn't have told me anything different. I thought the whole time I was being set up.
It's also kind of important to point out that in those early days, that was very common.
Right.
So it's like, it's not far-fetched to be like, you're setting me up. It's par for the course almost.
And so I was just livid and thinking, and I was just like, all right, come on, here we go. And so it was funny, like Shoney came out, and then I came out, and we went to town, and I was just so, I think it was the most ready I've ever been for a fight because I was so pissed thinking I was being set up by him this whole time. And I ended up choking Shoney out in like a minute and a half. I got a call from the UFC. I don't know how they got my number or any of that stuff, but they called me probably a week after that fight and asked me to.
Was your first fight for the UFC against Robbie Lawler?
No, my very first fight was against Tony D'Souza, and I lost a decision to D'Souza. And then my second fight was against Benji Raddick, and I ended up it became a no contest. It was kind of a bullshit deal. I caught Raddick in an ankle lock, and he started to go down, but he reached out and he grabbed the fence. And then he started punching the back of my head. Well, I was trying to crank that foot, and I couldn't get him to fall down. I couldn't figure it out. Well, he was illegally holding the fence. And the next thing I know, he was hitting me in the back of the head with these shots as he's holding this. And the next thing I know, the ref jumps in and stops it. And so
thinking it's a KO, but then after a later review, he's illegally holding the cage. So
the ref thought I was just taking too much punishment, is what he said. And I was like, and it was funny because Raddick runs across the ring. I jump up, and I'm in my deal, and I yelled at the ref. I was like, you understand? You just broke my submission. And so I'm standing there, and the ref's like, oh, that's it.
Shit.
Game over. And so it's the only decision that I know of so far to this date that's ever been overturned, because they called it a loss. And then my dad, who was acting as my manager at the time, submitted a complaint. They had a review, and it's the only UFC decision that's ever been overturned.
Before the state athletic commissions take
or
over.
here's another first, you know,
Yeah.
or it's the first, one of the others. So the athletic commission overturned it, and it's listed as a no contest now.
During this time when you're fighting for the UFC, what's life like? I mean, not just like the training and everything, but I'm talking about how are people interacting with you when you're explaining to people? Because this is before
Right.
people knew what cage fighting was. So,
No.
like, how are you explaining to your friends, family, people walking down the street, like, what it is that you're doing?
You just got frustrated because, like, you know, you would sit there, friends, family, you know, strangers, if anybody asked, like, goes, so what is that? Is that like pro wrestling? No. It's
Far
is
from, brother.
Is it like boxing? No, it's not. It's like an actual real fight.
Ben Lawler and the Tom James family will ensure that whether you're purchasing your first custom fit suit or your 50th, the process is unrivaled. With the experience and quality of the Tom James name, allow Ben Lawler to help shape the vision that is your professional brand with a suit that speaks to the conviction in their craft. With fabric sourced here in the US, you'll know quality and craftsmanship are top of class. Like a sculptor examines wet clay before creating a masterpiece, Ben Lawler will walk you through the process of selection, measuring, and stitching to ensure your finished product is a work of art. Putting your trust in Ben is a guarantee that your brand will elevate to the next level. And always remember, you don't get a second chance at a first impression.
And like I said, whenever I first was wondering whether I should hit the okay on the pay-per-view or not, you know, I was thinking, this is probably going to be fake. And, you know, and it's the same thing. You try and explain to them, no, it's a real fight. Really? You know, they just didn't really believe you because nobody had really seen it at that time, you know. So it would get frustrating trying to explain it to people and stuff, you know. You'd have to put a video in or invite somebody to the show to get them to believe it.
When you were going through this, were you actually developing any sort of relationships with some of your other combatants? Because one of the things that I now have stepping away from MMA is a lot of the guys that I have fought are now my friends.
Right.
A lot of the guys, I mean, you said something earlier that kind of resonated with me when you were like, I don't necessarily need to dislike you to fight you.
Sure.
I don't need to hate you to
Right.
go to get into a cage and fight you. And I always felt the same way. Like I was like, hey man, at the end of the day, it's to me it's a sport. It's just a very real sport, right? During this though, because it's a different time, are there any relationships being built with any other fighters, or are you just kind of keeping to yourself?
Yes and no. I had a really tough thing. In 1984, my mother got hit by a drunk driver, and it flipped her car like end over end, like 70 feet. And my dad was right behind her. So he came running up, opened up the door. She fell out, ended up like her brain had smacked off the sides of her skull. So I think I was 10 or 11 at the time. And my dad, you know, she was in the hospital. It definitely messed her up to the point where she couldn't use her left arm at all. She had about 60% use of her right arm. She could not walk.
So
paralyzed. My dad, yeah, basically. And my dad moved her into the house. So here, that was a decision he made. So here it was basically me and him playing nurse to this
when you
woman.
say, forgive me, I'm looking for context. When you say moved him into the house, were your parents separated at the time? Did they never get married?
No. My parents were married, and you know, my dad just absolutely loved it. The doctors came and said, "Look, you know, here's the deal. You should pull the plug because the best she's ever going to be is a vegetable." Blah blah blah. My dad just absolutely loved her. He couldn't do it, but instead of getting her into a place that could help her, he moved her in, and then it was just him and I. So it was just, you know, hindsight being 20/20, instead of one life being ruined, you ruined 3 lives. It was just a poor decision because it was him and I taking care of her 24 hours a day. She
And then at a
needed
young age, you
everything.
went from son to
Right.
parent real quick.
Absolutely. So a lot of people would always ask me why, because you ask about relationships, I had plenty of high level good guys saying, come on out here, come on out here. But I knew I was the muscle for my dad, and my mom. And I knew he was having heart attacks all the time. He was going down, and, so I would have to go and I'd have to cover and I'd have to, you know, basically just take care of her while he was out, or he needed help weekly too. I mean, so
How do you look
I
back on
didn't.
that time with resentment or
Yeah, I'd say it's funny. I never ever talked about it. Now I'm 51 years old, and now here so many people never even knew. My
I
some of
didn't
my
know, by
other
the way, forgive me.
Yeah, some of my other friends, of course. No, like I said, I never talked about it. I just always kept it into myself. My wife actually told me, "Look, you really need to get therapy." And I started talking to the therapist, and the therapist kind of, he opened me up, and obviously we had some good talks about stuff, and he just told me, there's nothing that you need to hide or
When your wife was telling you to go to the therapist, was it because she thought that you were having like something inside of you that was affecting your life, or like what was the
well,
catalyst for her to be like, you need to go see a therapist on this?
Well, yeah. I mean, she just
She knew.
she'll tell you. I was definitely that
Holding on to
yeah.
something.
There's the problem with
By the way, if you don't mind me asking, both of your parents are no longer alive.
yeah.
Okay,
No, they're
okay.
both gone. They're both gone.
Rest in peace.
My dad died when I was 38. My mom died when I was 42. So long time ago.
Okay.
But I mean, I just the era that I grew up in and stuff. Like I said, I was born in '73, and my dad, he was a great guy. I love my dad. He had plenty of mistakes, plenty of faults.
Human.
Right, absolutely. But I did love him, and I know he loved me. And there was just one of the big things is like I just had nobody to talk to about anything. I could talk to my dad about certain things, but I couldn't talk about that situation because he felt guilty, and he deep down he knew he screwed up too. He shouldn't have done what he did. He it was like I said, talk about being sleep deprived, and being a young boy and having to get your mother up, having to put your mother, take her to the bathroom. I mean, it was just
It would
it
have been
was
fine if the responsibility fell on him alone, but it did
right,
not.
right.
So he made a decision that didn't just affect him, but also affected you.
Absolutely. So, and there was, like I said, we loved each other, but there was just a lot of fighting, the whole bit.
Did
And
that
there,
decision affect the relationship between you two, you and your father?
I was very close to him all the way up till about a year before he died. He had gotten into it with my wife, and he and I, it was kind of like Mike and I. We would both
Two
button
alpha males,
heads.
opposing views.
Absolutely. And so both of us wrote each other off, and neither one of us, had the strength to call the other. And I guess probably maybe 2 months, 3 months before he died, we kind of started talking. And
If you don't mind me asking, did he know that he was going to pass, or was the passing a surprise?
so I,
Because when you say 2 months, it's almost as if there
yeah,
was like some foresight.
here's the thing. I think he knew. I got a call. It was Thanksgiving weekend, and my wife's family lives in Kansas City. So we were driving down to Kansas City. I get a call, and it's from him, and he's like, "Hey, I had a real bad heart attack. I'm here in the hospital." And I was like, "Jesus Christ, Dad, I'm gonna turn around." And this was probably his 20th fucking heart attack. I mean, I could tell you stories
Is
about
it like hereditary? Like why the heart attacks? His
I don't,
lifestyle,
I
obesity?
think, he
Do you have
wasn't.
heart attacks?
No,
No.
I,
Okay, so it's not like
and I've, last time I got checked, I was healthy as a horse,
okay,
so, they
just a one
always
off.
say hereditary, and like his mom and his dad both died from heart attacks. And so I always saw it that, but, you know, my dad had smoked. He ate like shit, never worked out. Same with his mom and his
Well, okay,
dad.
then I don't know if that's
So
hereditary or
yeah,
lifestyle.
right. So, you know, I mean, that's just the thing. Like I try and stay in shape. I try and eat semi decent, and you know, we'll see. You know, let the chips fall where they may. But so far, I'm okay. You know.
So
But
2 months before he reached out to you, told you he had that last heart attack, and
well, no, this was the day before he died. You know, like he called me. Well, it was like right before Thanksgiving, like day before. Calls me. He says, "Hey, I'm in the hospital." I was like, "All right, I'm turning around." He's like, "No, no, no, don't worry, son." And you know, I want to tell because we had the kids in the car, and he's like, "Hey, I love you all," and then he's telling me that he loves, and
he
my
knew.
dad and I
He knew.
always
He
butted
knew.
heads, and that's the thing. That's
He
why I
knew.
think he knew because he always butted heads, and I started out, I was like, "Dad, this is ridiculous. You know, you need to." Me and you need to sit down. We need to talk to a social worker. We need to start. You can't keep taking care of mom, you know, because she still needed all that care. And
He needed care himself.
he normally would fight with me. There wasn't one time he wouldn't fight with me. And this time he's like, you know what, son, you're right. I agree 100%. Hey, I love you. You know, he told me that while I got a call that night, like 2 in the morning. I call up and he's dead.
Jesus.
And so yeah, that just destroyed me. It was a rough deal because I was even frustrated with him on the phone. And like I said, this was, you know, maybe not 20, but it was in the teens that he had had heart attacks, and I would constantly go. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I'd get up in the middle of the night, have to run to the hospital, take care of my mom, do all that while he healed up, have to help him, all that. So I was even frustrated with him on the phone, and I'm sitting there, you know, like I luckily I can remember being frustrated and him telling me how much he loved me and all this stuff, and I was like, well, I love you too, but I remember kind of being rough about
Hostile.
it. Yeah, yeah, and it just kind of, you know, it just, you know, choking me up right now thinking about it.
It's choking me up. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's
but
a beautiful story, and there's value in this story though, Steve, because it, as cliche as it sounds. So my mother passed when I was 19,
yeah,
and I don't have a lot of we have some similarities. Like it's like a Venn diagram. We have some
sure,
things that are similar and some things that are different. But I remember when I look back on it, it's funny because I was actually more selfish. Like I just assumed my mom would be okay. And then now looking back, I wish I would have spent more time. I wish I
yeah,
would have helped more. I wish I would have done all these things, but I was like a young kid. I was 13, 14. I was like, "Oh, mom's fine. Like
sure,
everything's fine." It's only in hindsight that I look back. So it's interesting to me to hear the paradigm of your story because it was almost as if like you were fully aware of it, and like you also have the beauty of like hindsight in 2020.
sure,
Obviously, you've been removed from it, so you can think about it objectively, not
right.
emotionally. Fuck, it's. Do you think even in the turmoil and all that, when you look back on it, how do you view it? Because I can speak for myself. There's a little bit of shame on
Sure.
how I acted,
Oh, absolutely.
but there's just an overwhelming amount of guilt. I wish I would have done things differently, but I can't necessarily say that we might have the same story. So I'm interested, like I said, you
Right.
never have to answer anything you don't want, but like when you look back on it, it seems like there's still something like were there unsaid words you think?
Oh, of course. I mean, there's you know just there's plenty of nights and plenty of times that I wrestle with myself, and like I said, I didn't talk to anybody. I drove my wife nuts because I wouldn't talk to her, and obviously I would blow up and you know get angry at different things and stuff like that, and that's why you know it really helped me when at least when I had that therapist and I was like, well, this guy he doesn't know anybody I know, and
You
you
can let
know
loose.
it was during COVID, and I'd tell stories and I'd talk about stuff that bugged me with my dad and stuff that bugged me with my mom and stuff I went through, and I just one thing's for sure, you know, if you got something that's bothering you, definitely get a therapist. I think I had a hard time with it at first. It took me probably about 5, 6 sessions before I finally would even open up to the guy. You know, my Carly just kept pushing me to go and go. And I basically, we'd sit there. It was during COVID, so it was on the phone. I'd just go out to my car. I'd get in there, and there'd be 10 minutes go by. I wouldn't say anything. And this guy, I guess he was like, well, I'm getting paid, you know. And then he'd ask a question here and there. And I didn't really even give two shits, you know, because she was making me do it. So I'd sit there, and then he'd finally, you know, so what are you thinking now? Are you going to, you feeling like you're ready to talk now? And, you know. And so, and it would take me some time, and then finally I'd open up, and, you know, we'd start going from there.
I want to be careful how I ask this next question, because I myself, it's something that hits a little near and dear to me, because there's a lot of times where let me ask it in the perspective of myself. I like to think of myself as like one of the strongest guys that I know. I'm mentally tough. I can time manage very well. I don't take shit for granted. It takes a lot to overwhelm me or stress me. However, in the back of my head, Steve, I know that I got some fucked up shit with me in my head. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a coincidence that I chose to fight after my mom died. Let me put it to you that way. I think more it's because of, not in spite of. And one of the things that I've kind of wrestled with personally, if you've been very honest with me, so I'm going to be very honest with you.
Sure.
There have been instances in my life where I thought to myself, like, am I doing shit because, like, I'm so fixated on my mom had a vision of what she wanted for her kids. So, like, am I doing all of this because I want to do it, or am I doing this because this is what she wanted me to do? And then it makes me think, like, the domino effect, like, well, am I living my own life, or am I living a life that someone else wanted me to have? And it's made me think truthfully about getting a therapist. But if I could be honest with you, there's this hesitancy. There's this, like, I'm not fucked up in the head. Like, I don't need a fucking therapist. Like, there's like this ego, you know what I mean? Like, what's he going to tell me that I don't already know? I lived it. I know it. In the back of my head, I know that there's something wrong with me. It's just that this thing that's wrong with me is also helping me. So, like, I guess the best way I can ask this question is, like, what was, you know, Carly was the one that kind of, like, pushed you into it, but, like, what was the catalyst? Like, what was the finally, like, fuck it, I just don't want to fight this anymore? Like, okay, fine, I'll talk to the guy. Like,
yeah, I mean, it was just to the point where she and I were butting heads all the time. You know, I mean,
it was affecting the relationship.
Obviously, I'm very opinionated, and I have my own, I'm set in my ways and stuff like that. And so, I'm kind of like a dog with a bone on some things, and I will, I'll die before I give in sometimes. And
I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah, and that, it might be fine in the cage, but it doesn't work too well in real life. And it's cost me a lot throughout my life. And it just kind of, you know, it was getting to the point where, you know, I mean, for lack of better words, I wasn't good to Carly. I treated her, I should have treated her better. Going through that when my dad died, when my mom died, when, you know, I was at the point where, man, I kind of screwed up my fight career. I was bouncing off the walls, all this stuff. And, you know, that's when she was basically just telling me, look, you need a therapist, or I'm packing up and heading to Kansas City, you know.
How do you battle that as a man? Because I do subscribe to, like, suck it up pussy mentality, right? Like, whenever I can tell you that the idea of, like, the thing that gets me by is, I think to myself, like, yeah, I'm stressed. Yeah, I have all this shit on my shoulders. So fucking what? So does every other man. I'm no different from any other person. Simultaneously, it seems like I want to be careful how I say this, because I'm not trying to insult myself. Perhaps my ego is too strong, but it's also my ego that's got me to where I am. And where I am makes me happy. So in a lot of ways, I wrestle with myself, like, okay, like, let's say I'm fucked up, like, in my head. Like, let's say I am.
Sure.
It's bred so much success in my life. I love my wife. I love my kid. I love my job. I love everything about my life. So is it good to continue this way? Like, does that make sense? Like, what I'm trying to explain, like it's had positive outcomes. Should I change it? Should I go see somebody? Should I talk? Maybe I should just keep my mouth shut.
It's a yes and a no, and it's kind of one of those things where you have to answer things like I touched on before. Did I handle things right whenever I left Rodrigo's, whenever I left Mike? Did I handle things right when I pushed Carly to the point where, like, if you don't get I'm
gonna leave
a therapist, I'm done, and that's no, I didn't, and is that manly? No, it's not. The best advice I could give is, if you want to be a man, realize, hey, you're screwed up. You need to get yourself checked out. And you need to fix what's ailing you, and that's the best way. And obviously, I'm a work in progress.
I think we all are.
Right.
I think
absolutely.
We all are.
And and the biggest thing, one of the biggest factors was just having kids. That helped me out tremendously, because when I would start snapping or stepping across the line with my poor boy, he was the first, then I started realizing, man, I gotta change this real quick, because Landon loved grappling. He loved jiu-jitsu when he was a kid. He was just rough and tumble. And because I kind of pushed him too much and started getting on him too much, he just bowed out.
You were pushing him away from it.
Yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. And it wasn't until I finally had just, it's just done. I had tried and tried, and I was like, it's just done. And it wasn't until he was 16 that he came to me and was like, Dad, will you teach me how to fight? I was like, son, I would love to teach you how to fight. You don't know how much you made my day. So, and then, here he is, he's 18, and he just lives it. It's like looking at a young me,
Can I also say something beautiful that came from that too? Like,
Sure.
talking about the transition in life from, like, fighter to not fighter to coach to father, whatever, all the titles that you'll accumulate in your life. Is there a part of you that loves the fact that he's also training at St. Charles MMA under Mike?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Bringing it back full circle.
One of the main reasons too, like, I wasn't really losing money at my gym, but it was kind of one of those things where I never had
About Berger MMA. Okay.
Berger MMA, but I never had the balls to go 100%. I didn't do what Mike did and just quit the day job and run the gym. I kept my day job the whole time and then would just run it at
That's
night.
rough, man. Because you have two full-time jobs.
And I was missing all kinds of time with the kids. It was causing problems with me and Carly, because I was just gone. I didn't get home till like 9 o'clock at night every night.
Monday through Sunday.
Kids, I'd kiss them goodnight, and then that's that. And I'd miss it. And it really started wearing on me, especially like right after my dad died at 38, because, I think I stayed in it because I was always hoping that I could bail him and my mom out. So there was a lot of, I was notorious for just taking fights without even having a training camp. I stepped in and fought, and it was just silly. I just kind of ruined my career towards the end.
Did they put that responsibility on you, or did you put that responsibility on you?
My dad never sat there and pushed me to do it, but I knew that he was in tough times, and so
you just wanted to.
Yeah, and it was funny, because the biggest mistake I made was never taking a break. If I'd have taken a 6-month to a year off, or got that fire back, I just kept going. Yeah, okay. I can't tell you the number of times I'd be scheduled to fight a top 10 guy 2 months before, and I'd be like, all right, yeah, sounds good. I'll get in there. Well, I'd be working. I'd train once or twice a week, or whatever. And the next thing you know, well, here's a fight. Can't back out, so.
I was just talking to JP earlier today, and we brought this up about, like, the difficulty in fighting is not necessarily the training camp and the fighting. It's the fact that there's so little money to be made until you get to a certain level that you're having to balance so many other things. Like, JP just had his second kid, so it's like JP's a father of 2. Right. He has his own businesses now. He's got his hydroponics and everything. If he wanted to come in there and do it again, like, how many hours a day do you got to spend for a fight camp? I would say 3 to 4 easy. Easily. Right? 3 to 4 easy. So you're talking about over the course of a week, how many hours you're spending. It's a full-time job almost, right? And then you're taking that time away from your kids. You're taking that time away from your work, from your family, all these other things. Is it right? Is it the correct decision? one of the hardest things for me to do was retire, not because I didn't think I could keep doing it. I'm only 31. It was because I had my kid. I was about to get married to my wife,
Right.
and I was like, okay, it's no longer about me. And it was like a very tough transition, because you were talking earlier about like how you attach so much of like who you were to, like, I'm a fighter, I'm this badass, I'm this fucking I'm an alpha male. So like I did the exact same thing, and then
Sure.
like stepping away from that, there was like this transitionary period where I was like, well, maybe I'm not an alpha, maybe I'm not a badass, maybe I'm not these things. Like, then who am I?
Right.
It's such a hard. I I don't know how anyone does it successfully. And when I
It's
see it, I'm almost like, dude, what secret did you know that I just did not
absolutely,
have in this equation?
absolutely, and it's just, it's the old cliche. When you start taking all your eggs out of the basket and spreading them around, something suffers. It's
Yes.
just, and like you were saying, whenever you're a father, you're a husband, you're a business owner, you got work. What's going to suffer? The
There's only so
training.
many hours in the
Right,
day.
right, absolutely, absolutely.
How do you feel about, branching out and owning your own gym? Like, when you look back on it, like, what's the thought? Is it like fond memories? Is it rough memories? Like, when you think back about Berger MMA, like, how do you view that time?
It was a good
Because you
time.
produced a UFC fighter yourself in
Sure,
Chris Heatherly, so it's not like
sure.
it was
And
like,
Pat Healy.
yes, Pat,
Healy
forgive
too.
me, and Pat Healy,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And I'll tell you what, I know she went to Militich, but I'll take credit for Barb Honchak too.
Dude, Barb was a
So
fucking
yeah,
beast.
she was with me for about 6 or 7 years before she went to Militich. But yeah, so it's and I know all her foundation came from when she trained with me. But it's good times. I'm glad I did it. Probably towards the end too. Like I said, my son at that time was just like, is not something I want to do, and I was working every day. Carly, of course, was on me consistently because she couldn't stand the fact that I wasn't there with the kids or helping her out. So I just ended up. I took a
I
long,
know.
hard look, and I was like, I'm just gonna bow out. Now,
Do you still keep up with a lot of the guys from there, like O'Connor, the Newmans?
I talk to O'Connor every once in a while. I'll see Damien and talk to him. Basically, my wife sees him because she does a lot of lime washing, and he's into
Gotcha.
the bricklaying and stuff like that. So, uh, there's Tyler Gross, who was little bitty, and Duncan Gross, who were little bitty. I talk to them from time to time. Mark Botindry, who had helped me out tremendously with coaching wrestling at my gym. I still keep in touch with him. A few people here and there.
You still
But
coach now, correct?
yeah, I coach right down the street here at
Krav Maga.
Solzy's. Yeah. They run a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu class, and I coach it. I was doing 2 days a week. They just cut it back to 1 day a week. So Carly's happy about that too. So.
Do you think there'll ever be a time where you no longer coach or teach jujitsu?
I don't know. I think I really think that I have to do it. It's just in my blood.
Because it keeps you on the mats, or what?
Well, just because I enjoy it. That's all. And it's not even so much the coaching as I just like to go up and I like to wrestle around and stuff. So I think I'll always. I'm not crazy about only coaching 1 day a week right now. I like the 2 day schedule, and then every once in a while I would do something on a Saturday or something, which was fun. But now I'm down to once a week, so I'm not too crazy about that. I want to pick up another day, assuming I can.
What is it like watching your son kind of, I don't want to say follow in the footsteps, but walk a similar path to you? Is it like, because we were talking earlier about how you were kind of a little too, I don't want to use the term aggressive, but maybe too pushy, right? Like you were trying to push him
Sure.
to a certain path,
Right,
and it was
right.
causing some schism and causing him to kind of veer away from what it is that you wanted to do, and then when you took the foot off the pedal, so to speak, he kind of aligned and found his own way into a similar sport that you did.
Absolutely.
So like, how do you navigate that as like a father, as a coach, as all these things? Because now you're kind of seeing your son, who I believe is a senior, just graduated high school.
Just graduated.
So like, he's kind of coming into his own now. He's turning into a young man himself. Like, how do you navigate, how much do I push? How much do I try to instill? How much do I back off? How much do I leave to the coaches? How much do I try to take on to myself?
I have since he and Mike have hooked up. I pretty much just kind of let my foot all the way off the gas pedal. He comes down to my class every Monday. He was coming every Monday and Thursday after Mike's, but now it's every Monday that he'll come down, and he and I will wrestle. I show him stuff. And
what does that feel like to wrestle your own son?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's great. I mean, he's just, you want to talk about a dog, man. I'm curious to see how this boy is going to do. He's tough. He just is stubborn as I ever was when it comes time to like tap.
He looks like you. He looks like you.
Yeah, he's tough, and he'll be better than me too. He's already training way harder, and he's living it. I'm just so proud of him. He came to me beginning of his senior year. He had been doing jiu-jitsu about 4 months with me and with Mike. And he's like, you know what, Dad, I think I'm going to wrestle. And I was like, Landon, this is senior year. These kids have been wrestling since kindergarten. I said, don't expect to win a match. And he's like, oh, I don't care. I'm just going to do it because I hope to fight someday in the future, and I know wrestling's important. I said, that's great. If you go in with that attitude, just going with the attitude, you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player, you'll be fine. He finished his season 27-22, and he was like 10 seconds away from going to state at districts. So I was just like, it wasn't a fairy tale story. It would have been fairy tale if he went to state. He probably would have gotten murdered at state, but it would have been very cool for him to make it. But he almost made it to state, and I was just really pumped.
I'll say to you the same thing I tell, because I coach at Afton High School. I'll tell you the same thing I tell my kids is like, everyone in here will have their own metric for success.
Sure.
For some of you, it might be just making it to the end of the season.
Right.
You might just be JV and you just want to make it to the end of the season, which I don't know about you, but our turnover is roughly 50%. If we start with 50 kids or 100 kids at the beginning of the season, we're going to have 50 or 25 by the end. And that's always been the case. Wrestling is a very tough sport to see to an end. That season is so grueling, taxing mentally and physically, when you also accompany the fact that they're still full-time students, right? Some kids might want to have just a winning record. Some kids might want to be state qualifiers or a district champion. Some people want to be state medalists. Some people want to be a state champion. And I always say to people, like, there's no right or wrong answer. The only thing that's right or wrong, and I do believe this, is whether or not you've wrestled or not. That's it.
Absolutely.
If you come to the mats and you're JV all year, I don't care. You still did more than most.
Sure.
If you come in and you win only one match that year, you've won one more match than most.
That's it.
I was very hyper competitive when I was in school and when I competed, because I had a threshold for what I thought success was. And it wasn't until I took a step back from competition and kind of like from a higher vantage point and kind of seeing a little bit more of the lay of the land that I realized, like, I don't want people to be dismayed or to not accept sport. I want everybody, man and woman, young and old, to find solace in sports, whether that's wrestling, basketball, whatever it is.
Sure.
I think wrestling's the best, but I'm biased.
Right.
And I think, we put too much emphasis. This is going to sound so like, you should try to win, but the act of trying is in itself a victory, because so many people will not even try. Now, should you want more than just that? Absolutely. You should want to win more matches than you lose. You should want to go to state. You should want to do all these things. But the fact that you even did it, it brings up that quote of like the man in the arena. It's like everybody will have an opinion of you, but they don't know what it's like to be in that arena, to compete, to fall, to succeed. I think it's especially important for young men And now that women's wrestling has kind of separated and they have their own league, I would say it's just as important for women as well.
Absolutely.
So I love the fact that I actually met up with you at Melville High School. I haven't seen you in a while, and I was like,
that's right.
"What's going on, man?" And we shook hands, and you're like, "That's my boy. Your boy had just beat my guy." I was like, "Fuck me."
I remember.
Yeah, it was a good match. It was a good match.
Yeah, it was. Tough kid.
Yeah, and then I remember when we had left, I remember just feeling like I don't know, like how to explain it, because like your son had beat my kid, but it was like this mutual respect and this bond over sport that I realized like it truly doesn't matter who won or lost. Right. It matters that the match happened. Right. It matters that they competed.
It's the man in the arena.
Yes.
Just like you were saying, I mean, that's just it, and that's the best thing. I remember my dad gave me a little plaque with Teddy Roosevelt's quote, "The man in the arena," and I'll never forget it. It's just, it's easy to point out where the strong man stumbled, but,
what do you think you want to do next with, I mean, because you and this is also a question I asked Mike, but like kind of off camera. I wish I would have asked him on. Mm-hmm. You guys have been in this game for so long, Steve. And you guys have seen things come and go, fighters come and go, seasons come and go. The whole sport has changed, like the face of it. Back when you were coming up, you could have one style. Now, if you're not learning it and everything, good luck,
Right.
What is left with you and this sport? What's the goal? Is it just to maintain because it brings you happiness? Is there any sort of competitive edge?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me right now is Landon. I mean, having Landon in there, obviously, like I said, I love it, but having him in there is obviously keeping me drawn to it, and as long as he's in it, I told him several times the happiest day of my life is going to be the day that you tap me out, but it's also going to be the saddest day of my life. So it's funny, I'm always like, every time we're wrestling, I'm like, man,
he's getting closer.
He's getting good. He hadn't gotten close yet, but he's getting good.
Be careful what you're teaching. We're showing him all the secrets.
It's just funny. It's like, man, I need to make some more time to get up and start grappling because he's getting tough.
That's got to be the most bittersweet pill, right? When your son finally surpasses you.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I used to, I'd just tap him with anything I want. And now it's like, man, this
I got to work for
it. I got to really work to
when he says that he wants to compete and fight, like, what's the mentality? MMA, boxing, jiu-jitsu?
He wants to do MMA. Is what he wants to do. That's his main goal. He wants to fight.
Has he had an amateur bout yet or no?
No, he hasn't had any. He really wanted to fight May 17th, and I was trying with NFA. They threw me a couple guys. I didn't like the matches for his first match. I mean, he's 18, but he's a young 18. He just turned 18 in April. So it's kind of, they're giving 24, 25, 26-year-old guys.
You're looking for something that's more competitive.
Yeah, I'd like him to get somebody 18 to 21 or something, just like him is what I'd like. Now, he's training with, 20 to 40-year-old guys up there. And I know that, but I'm dad.
Well, dude, it's
nervous.
still. Yeah,
Right.
I think you're right to be nervous as well, because it's really weird when you're in like high school. I could tell you for myself, when I was in high school sports, the oldest you're gonna compete against is 18, and I was 18 at the time, so it was like very relatively even.
Right.
3 months later, I'm fighting like a 25-year-old. You know what I mean? I'm just like, holy shit! I'm fighting a grown man. I'm still a child myself. You know what I mean?
And like talking about those fights when I first started, there wasn't sanctioning bodies either. So there was plenty of times where I was taking fights against guys that were 20, 25 pounds heavier than me.
What do you think about the transition from like? Because I remember when I came up, like the Jim Jenkins show at the Heart of St. Charles was like the show, right?
Sure.
Like you go back even farther behind that, so it's like. When you see, from what it was, I believe when I was coming up, Spire was like the sanctioning body. It was like Spire and I believe BMF, right? That there was two sanctioning bodies and they were basically businesses. And then the state got involved with amateur and pro. So like when you see this transition, just walk me through like how crazy it's been for you to see. I remember my first fight, Steve. We didn't even weigh in. Mm-hmm. We literally got there, all the guys that were willing to fight, and they're like, you guys look about the same weight. You guys will fight. And I remember I came from wrestling where if you were 0.1 over on the scale, you were overweight. And I was like, what is this shit? Like, I'm cutting weight. I could have just shown up and been like, yeah, I'm buck 25. Like, prove me wrong. It was a culture shock for me. But like, even that is a couple steps removed from when you started.
Dude, when I started, when Mike and I started, because I think he started like 2 or 3 fights after me, I can remember going to a show and they would be like, bring your own gloves. And I remember this guy, John Rankin, he had these gloves and he'd be like, check these out. And he'd pull this little flap. There was no padding in the glove.
Oh my God.
He'd pull this little flap up. No the things, I don't forget what you call them, the straps that you put your fingers through, were all gone. So, he'd be in there. And, he would as he would throw a punch, you'd see that flap come up and he'd hit the guy with the bare fist, It was, but it was all bring your own gloves and.
Dude,
it was nuts.
West.
Oh yeah, it was Wild West back then. It was
so you have to look at it now and be like, thank God this thing got involved.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
The sanctioning bodies and everything.
Absolutely.
I have to agree because I'll be honest with you. I like to think of myself as like a savage and all that stuff, but if I was coming up during those times, I'd be like, fuck this.
Oh,
I'm not getting paid enough for this.
It was silly stuff, man. Back then, I had a couple of funny experiences at just different times. How I was growing up.
Steve, there's a couple of other things I could probably ask you, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have loved the honesty and the just the humility that you've shown in this show. I don't really want to deviate from the topics we've had so far today. I want you to know that it was an immense pleasure to have you on, to have this conversation. Truly
Awesome.
It was.
Awesome.
You went down some paths I didn't think we would go down, but I'm glad we did. And you've illuminated a lot of the things that I didn't know about your past and Mike's past. And I look up to you guys in a lot of ways. Awesome. So like this is it gives me more context on like who you guys were, both the good and the bad. A lot of the humility in both men showing like, hey, we were young and dumb and making mistakes too. But
sure.
I just want to say thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
I would always extend to you. You are more than welcome to come on anytime to talk about anything you want to. But at this point, I think this is a good stopping point. I don't want to bring up anything else. And I just want to say, Steve, thank you so much for being on.
Hey, thanks for having me, brother.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.